I was floating. At least that's what it felt like. I couldn't tell how long I'd been drifting in this endless black void. Time had lost its meaning. The darkness wasn't just around me. It was inside me, wrapping itself around my bones, seeping into every crevice of my mind. My senses were dulled, muffled, like I was caught in a heavy fog. I had no body, no voice, no identity. Just the steady, slow crawl forward. And then there was light. It pierced through the darkness like a blade, sharp and sudden, forcing me to squint. A door appeared in front of me, glowing with a blinding white light. The humming started softly at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder and louder until it was a roar in my ears. I wanted to cover them, but I had no hands, nothing to protect me. The sound reverberated through my skull, almost unbearable and then. Start life from scratch, but don't waste time. The voice echoed inside my head, booming and commanding. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Before I could make sense of it, the light flashed brighter, and I felt something, someone, shove me hard. There was no time to resist. I was pulled down, spiraling, crashing back into the weight of my own body. The first thing I noticed was the pain. It was like I had been slammed back into myself, my bones heavy and stiff, my skin too tight. The room was bright, fluorescent lights overhead flickering like they couldn't make up their minds whether to stay on or off. My throat was sandpaper, dry and cracked, and when I tried to swallow, it felt like razor blades were cutting through me. But I was alive. That much was clear. I blinked slowly, fighting the exhaustion that still clung to me. My eyelids were heavy like lead, and when I finally managed to open them, I saw tubes, wires, machines beeping steadily in rhythm with the thud of my heartbeat. The sterile smell of antiseptic burned my nostrils. I tried to move, but my body felt foreign, like it wasn't mine anymore. Then I heard her voice. Olivia, my Olivia. She was close, her voice low, calm, almost tender. It sent a wave of relief through me. She was here. She hadn't left me. I wanted to call out to her, to tell her I was awake, that I was still here. But the words wouldn't come. My tongue felt thick, my mouth too dry. I could only listen. And when will I be able to re-register the property? I froze. What? My brain tried to catch up. Re-register the property? What was she talking about? A second voice responded, low and emotionless. I couldn't make out the exact words, but I caught enough. He won't survive this. A cold chill spread through my veins, freezing me in place. My heartbeat quickened, the steady beeps of the machine escalating into a panicked rhythm. But Olivia kept talking, oblivious to my sudden awareness. And if not, an inheritance, can it be done differently? But quickly, the voice, the cold, factual voice on the other side, wasn't offering comfort. It was answering her questions, clinically, as if we were talking about a business transaction. My death? A business transaction. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was in a nightmare that had to be it. I was still dreaming, still trapped in the void. But then I heard her laugh. That soft, familiar laugh, one that used to make me smile. But now it was tainted, twisted into something I couldn't recognize. I miss you, she continued, her voice dropping into that sweet tone she used when we were alone. I'm looking forward to not having to fear his return anymore. I tried to swallow the bile rising in my throat, but it was impossible. My chest tightened, my mind reeling. She wasn't talking about me with concern. She wasn't worried about my recovery. She was plotting for a future without me, a future where she'd be free, where she wouldn't have to worry about my return. And then it hit me. Olivia wasn't alone. She was talking to someone else, someone she was waiting for. I lay there, helpless, as her words hung in the air, thick with meaning. My body felt heavier than ever, the weight of the tubes and wires binding me to the bed suddenly suffocating. The air in the room felt thin, and I couldn't seem to pull in a full breath. Was I dying now? Was this it? No, I couldn't die. Not like this. A door opened, and I heard footsteps, someone coming toward the room. Olivia's voice grew quieter, softer, almost tearful now, as if she were rehearsing a performance. Doctor, tell me, how much longer will he suffer? Her words cut deeper than any pain I had ever felt. The last threads of hope snapped inside me. Olivia wasn't mourning me. She was waiting for the confirmation that I wouldn't make it, that I'd be gone, out of her life, and she could be free of me. I had to stay quiet. I had to keep still, pretend I didn't know. Because now, survival meant more than just waking up. It meant revenge. I spent the next few days trapped in a body that wasn't quite mine. It felt like being locked in a prison made of flesh, while my mind raced and thrashed, desperately trying to make sense of what I'd overheard. Olivia, my wife, the woman I'd built my entire life around, was planning for my death. Not just planning, eager for it. And she wasn't alone. I couldn't stop thinking about that voice. The one she had spoken to so calmly, so casually, as if they were discussing nothing more than what to have for dinner. It wasn't just business. It was personal. Someone was waiting for me to die, and Olivia was planning a future with them. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment affair. This was something that had been going on long before I ended up in this hospital bed. She had moved on from me a long time ago. I had just been too blind to see it. Lying there, weak and tethered to machines, I had nothing to do but replay the moments from our life together. The signs had been there. The late nights at work, the cold distance that had grown between us, her sudden obsession with independence, with our finances. It all made sense now. Every time I had tried to reach her, she had already been pulling away, slipping into someone else's arms. I felt a sickening combination of rage and humiliation. How could I have been so naive? I had given her everything, my time, my trust, my devotion. And in return, she had plotted behind my back, waiting for me to die so she could cash in. The days crawled by, each one blending into the next. Every visit from the nurses, every time the doctor came to check on me, I feared Olivia would return. That I would hear her voice again, dripping with false concern, while she calculated how soon she could be rid of me. But for a while, she stayed away, perhaps thinking I was already as good as gone. And then one morning, I heard her voice again. This time, it was different. There was an urgency in her tone, an edge that hadn't been there before. She wasn't playing the role of the grieving wife anymore. She was impatient, almost annoyed. I lay as still as I could, barely breathing, strained to hear every word. I just need to know when. I can't wait much longer. The voice on the other end, a man, definitely a man this time, responded, but his words were too muffled. I clenched my fists beneath the sheets, nails digging into my palms as I fought the urge to scream. My vision blurred with fury. The truth was finally staring me in the face. Olivia was having an affair. And this man, whoever he was not just her lover. He was her co-conspirator. They were planning my death together. Every beat of my heart felt like it would explode. I imagined them laughing about it, whispering sweet nothings while they waited for me to die. I could picture them celebrating with champagne the day they received the call that I was finally gone. I had given everything to Olivia. The house, the cars, the vacations, the life she always dreamed of. I had made it real for her. And all the while, she had been slowly, methodically removing me from the equation. And now she was growing tired of waiting. I didn't know what to do. I was still weak, too weak to confront her, too fragile to even raise my voice. But I couldn't lie there, powerless, while they plotted my death. I had to survive, not just for me, but to make sure they didn't get what they wanted. I made up my mind right then and there, staring at the ceiling with my body aching and my heart racing. I was going to play the long game. I would pretend. I would act like I didn't know. I would wait for the perfect moment, and then I would take back everything. The nurse came in not long after Olivia had left, checking my vitals, adjusting my IV. She gave me a soft smile, unaware of the storm raging inside me. "You're doing better today," she said, almost cheerfully. "We'll have you up and moving around soon." I nodded weakly, but inside, I was plotting. I had to keep up the appearance of being the helpless, clueless husband. I had to gather my strength, bit by bit, until I could finally confront her, and the man she was sneaking around with. Days blurred into weeks. I was healing, slowly but surely, and with each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I didn't say a word to anyone about what I knew. I didn't dare. Olivia continued her visits, each one shorter than the last. I could see the growing impatience in her eyes, the subtle hints of annoyance when I wasn't making the progress she hoped for. She wanted me to stay weak, to stay bedridden and helpless. But I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I learned to wait, to bide my time. The betrayal had burned a hole inside of me, but it hadn't consumed me. Not yet. And then, the moment came. It was a Tuesday, and I remember it clearly because the air smelled fresher that day, like rain was coming. I was lying in my hospital bed, drifting in and out of a light sleep, when I heard footsteps outside the door. But this time, it wasn't just Olivia. There were two sets of footsteps, soft, but unmistakable. I held my breath, keeping my eyes shut, pretending to be asleep as they entered the room. I heard Olivia whisper, her voice barely above a murmur. "This is it. He can't last much longer." The other voice, his voice, was closer now. I could hear the quiet smugness in it, the arrogance. Good. It's about time. I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to see him, to see the man who was waiting for me to die so he could take everything that was mine. But I stayed still, because now I had the upper hand. I knew Olivia's secret, and soon I'd have my revenge. The day I was discharged from the hospital, I didn't feel like a man returning to his old life. It felt more like being let out of a cage. There was a sense of dread mingling with my determination, like walking a tightrope over a pit I couldn't quite see the bottom of. I had spent weeks in that bed, healing physically while every passing hour sharpened my resolve. I had been left to rot, but now I was free. And I was ready. The doctors told me to take it easy, but I couldn't. How could I, knowing what waited for me at home? How could I, knowing Olivia was already planning her life without me, planning to take what I'd worked for and live it with someone else? I had to see it for myself. The taxi ride home felt like an eternity. Every passing street sign, every turn, only increased the anticipation gnawing at my insides. My mind ran wild with scenarios. Would she be home alone, still in the dark about my release? Or would I walk in and find her with him? This nameless man who had already slipped into my life, my house, my wife's bed. When the car finally pulled up to the front of our home, I sat there for a moment, staring at the house I had once loved. It looked the same on the outside, pristine, elegant, the life I had built for us. But now it felt like a facade, like the glossy surface of something rotten underneath. I was about to peel it back. I thanked the driver, my voice strained, and stepped out, my legs shaky from both weakness and adrenaline. As I walked toward the front door, each step felt heavier than the last. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached for the doorknob, but before I could turn it, I heard it, a voice. A man's voice, loud and careless, laughing from inside my home. My grip tightened. I pushed the door open. The scene inside was worse than I had imagined. There he was, lounging on my couch, his shirt unbuttoned, a glass of scotch in his hand, my scotch. He was laughing, the sound grating, too comfortable in a space that was supposed to be mine. He looked like he belonged there, like he had been there for a long time. Next to him stood Olivia, dressed casually, more casually than I'd ever seen her in our time together. She wasn't the polished, pristine woman I remembered from our nights out at fancy dinners or social events. No, she looked different. Relaxed, almost free. Her laugh was soft, matching his as she leaned against the fireplace, swirling a glass of wine. The fireplace, my fireplace, where we had once sat together, dreaming about the future. Only now, that future didn't include me. It was all for him. The room fell silent the moment I stepped inside. The look on Olivia's face when she saw me was something I would never forget. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, she looked pale, as if she had just seen a ghost. Maybe that's exactly what I was to her. After all, I was supposed to be dead, wasn't I? Liam? She stammered, her voice shaking with shock. I didn't answer. I couldn't trust myself to speak yet, the fury still boiling just beneath the surface. I glanced at the man, her lover. He had stopped laughing, and his smug expression vanished, replaced with confusion. For a brief moment, I savored the fear I saw flicker in his eyes. But I was here for her. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, my eyes never leaving Olivia's. "You've got 5 minutes," I said, my voice cold, detached. 5 minutes to pack your things and leave this house. Because if you're still here when my security team arrives, they'll throw you both out. Olivia blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Liam, wait. I can explain." "Shut up," I growled, feeling the heat of my anger finally break the surface. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear a damn word from you." She stared at me, her face pale, her mouth twisted in a grimace of desperation. But there was no remorse in her eyes, no guilt, just shock. Shock that her plan had fallen apart so completely. Shock that I was still standing in front of her. The man, this stranger in my home, stood up, trying to muster some kind of bravado. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but one look from me and he froze. He knew better. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the realization that this wasn't his fight. "You have 5 minutes," I repeated, my voice as calm and deadly as I could manage. For a moment, Olivia stood there, defiant, but she knew she had lost. She had no cards left to play. Slowly, she placed her wine glass down on the mantel, her hands shaking, and turned to head upstairs. The man followed her, glancing over his shoulder at me as if expecting some sort of confrontation. But I wasn't interested in him. He was nothing. It was her betrayal that had torn my life apart. I stood there in the living room, the silence deafening as I listened to their hurried footsteps upstairs, the frantic sound of suitcases being dragged across the floor. My heart pounded in my chest, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the satisfaction of finally watching her world fall apart, just like she had tried to destroy mine. It didn't take long for them to reappear, Olivia with her suitcase in hand, her lover trailing behind, looking every bit the coward I had imagined him to be. She stopped in front of me, her eyes pleading now, her voice shaking with desperation. "Liam, please, we can talk about this. We can work it out." I stared at her, the woman I had once loved so deeply, the woman I had planned my future with, now reduced to nothing more than a stranger. The weight of her betrayal hung between us, thick and suffocating. There was nothing left to say. "No," I said simply, my voice cold as ice. "There's nothing left to talk about." And with that, I turned my back on her, walking toward the door, my hands trembling with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear the front gate opening as my security team arrived, their voices calm, professional. "Get them out," I said, my voice steady as I stepped outside, feeling the cool evening air hit my face. "Make sure they don't come back." I didn't turn around to watch as Olivia and her lover were escorted out. I didn't need to. I had won. But as I stood there on the front lawn, watching the night sky turn darker, something else settled into my chest. Something far colder than anger. Emptiness. Olivia was gone, and with her, the life I had built crumbled into dust. But now, there was no going back. There was only forward. And as I stood there, I vowed to myself that this would not break me. Not her betrayal. Not the lies. Not the man she had thrown my life away for. This was just the beginning of my revenge. I thought the confrontation would bring some sense of closure. After I watched Olivia's car disappear down the driveway, I expected a rush of relief, maybe even victory. But the truth is, the moment she was gone, the house felt hollow, silent in a way I had never noticed before. It wasn't just the absence of her laughter or footsteps. It was the absence of everything we had built, everything that had been a lie. For days after that night, I wandered through the rooms, looking at the life we had made together like it was a museum exhibit. The photos on the walls, the expensive furniture we picked out, the trinkets from our travels. They were relics of a life I no longer recognized. I hadn't just lost my wife. I had lost my past, my future, everything that tied me to the person I thought I was. But the world doesn't stop just because your life falls apart. In the days following the confrontation, the lawyers were called. Papers were drawn up. The divorce, as inevitable as it was, didn't come without a fight. Olivia didn't go quietly. Oh no, she wasn't done trying to sink her claws into what was left of me. The legal battle begins. It started with a phone call from my lawyer. I was sitting in my office, staring blankly at the computer screen when the shrill ring broke the silence. "Liam, we've received her demands," my lawyer Marcus said, his voice tight with restrained annoyance. "She's coming for half of everything." I almost laughed. Half? She wanted half of my life? After everything she had done? After the lies, the affair, the betrayal? But the anger came quick and hot. I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white. Half of what? She thinks she's entitled to half after plotting behind my back. After sleeping with another man in my own home. Apparently she does, Marcus said dryly. She's also claiming emotional distress, that she was forced into a toxic marriage. I could practically hear the eye roll through the phone. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing a hand over my face. Emotional distress? Toxic marriage? The nerve of her. It was like she was rewriting our history, painting herself as the victim of a life she had gleefully enjoyed while I worked myself to the bone. It wasn't just money she was after. No, this was about punishment. She wanted to take everything I had built, everything I had left. She wanted to ruin me. She's not going to get a dime more than what the law allows, I said, my voice tight with determination. I'll see her in hell before I let her walk away with half. The realization of debt. The legal battle raged on. Olivia's lawyers were vicious, picking apart every asset, every investment, every scrap of property. It was a brutal back and forth, and for a while, it seemed like Olivia might actually walk away with more than I was willing to give. She wanted the house, the cars, the business, everything. But then, reality came crashing down on her like a cold wave. It was during one of our many meetings with the lawyers. We were seated around a large mahogany table in Marcus's office, the air thick with tension. Olivia sat across from me, poised and smug, her eyes barely meeting mine. Her lawyer rattled off a list of demands, but I wasn't really listening. I was too busy watching Olivia's face, trying to read her, trying to see the woman I once knew in the hard mask she now wore. Marcus interrupted the proceedings with a cough, sliding a folder across the table toward Olivia's lawyer. Before we proceed, I think it's important that you both understand the full financial situation. Olivia's lawyer frowned and opened the folder. His expression didn't change at first, but then his eyes widened slightly. He glanced at Olivia, who was still sitting there, cool and composed. But when she saw his reaction, her composure faltered. "What is it?" Olivia asked, a note of impatience in her voice. Her lawyer handed the folder to her, and for the first time since this whole thing had started, I saw true fear flash in her eyes. The realization hit her like a slap across the face. The property she was fighting for wasn't just an asset. It was also tied to a massive business loan I had taken out before the accident. A loan that still hung over us like a storm cloud. She hadn't known. She hadn't considered the debt. She thought she was walking away with wealth, with luxury. But what she was really fighting for was a sinking ship, and now she was tied to it. I watched her as she processed the numbers, her eyes darting across the page, her face growing paler with each passing second. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something to her, but she was too stunned to respond. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Olivia's lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this?" I leaned forward, my voice as calm as the storm building inside me. "That's the loan. You remember, don't you? The one I took to expand the business. The one that needs to be paid off before anyone sees a dime." Her eyes met mine, wide and full of panic. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You wanted half," I said, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Well, now you've got it. Half the debt, half the liability. Congratulations." For the first time since this whole ordeal started, Olivia was speechless. And I savored it. She had spent months plotting, scheming. And now, the reality of her greed had finally caught up to her. The collapse in the end. Olivia had no choice. Faced with the debt, the crushing weight of the financial burden, she caved. She signed the divorce papers, waiving her claim to the house, the business, and the loans. It wasn't the clean break she had expected. There would be no luxurious life on the other side, no grand future with her lover built on the spoils of my work. She walked away with nothing. The final meeting was anticlimactic. She signed the papers in silence, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly. Her lawyer looked more exhausted than angry. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching her crumble under the weight of her own greed was enough. As we stood to leave, Olivia turned to me one last time. Her eyes, once so full of fire and determination, were now hollow, defeated. I never wanted it to end like this, Liam, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. She wasn't the woman I had loved anymore. She was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone I no longer cared about. It was always going to end like this, I said quietly. You just didn't see it coming. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving her behind, along with the wreckage of our marriage. Freedom. Walking out of that building felt different than the day I had walked out of the hospital. This time, there was no emptiness, no lingering sadness. This time, there was only relief, freedom. The divorce wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of a chapter in my life that had nearly destroyed me. Olivia was gone, and with her, all the weight I had been carrying for years. I didn't need her. I didn't need the life we had built together. What I needed was a new start, a new beginning. And as I stood outside the courthouse, feeling the sun on my face for the first time in what felt like years, I knew that's exactly what I was going to get. After the dust of the divorce settled, I found myself navigating unfamiliar territory, life without Olivia. I had spent so long in the toxic fog of our marriage that I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. The house, once a symbol of everything I'd worked for, now felt more like a mausoleum. I had purged it of her presence, changed the locks, thrown out her things, but it still echoed with the memories of a life that wasn't real. It was strange, waking up alone, eating breakfast at a table that had once seated two, sometimes three when her lover had been around. I should have felt relief. I should have felt victorious. Instead, there was a hollow emptiness that gnawed at me. It wasn't that I missed Olivia, not the real her, at least. It was the phantom of the life I thought we had, the future I'd imagined. But that was gone now, and it was time to start something new. It was during one of those sleepless nights, sitting in the dark living room with the soft hum of the city outside, that I realized I didn't need to be in that house anymore. It wasn't my home. It was just a building full of memories I was trying to escape. I needed a change, a fresh start. That's when I decided to reach out to someone I hadn't thought much about in the chaos of my recovery and divorce. Dr. Emma, the woman who had helped me, saved me, even without asking for anything in return. She had been there during some of my darkest moments, her presence calming, her words soothing. But back then, I hadn't been in the right headspace to think of her beyond my recovery. Now, with the storm of my divorce behind me, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I remembered her kindness, her quiet strength, and the way she had looked at me, not with pity, but with genuine care. It wasn't just the way she treated me as a patient. It was something deeper, something real. The first call. It took me a few days to gather the courage to reach out to her. What if she saw me as just another patient? What if I was misrating everything? But the worst that could happen was a rejection, and after what I'd been through, I figured I could handle that. I picked up the phone and called the hospital, my heart hammering in my chest as I asked to be connected to her office. When her voice came through the line, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Dr. Emma speaking, she said, her voice as smooth and steady as I remembered. Emma, it's Liam, I replied, trying to keep the nerves out of my voice. I don't know if you remember me. Liam, she interrupted, her tone instantly warmer. Of course I remember you. How are you? How's the recovery? I'm doing well, I said, and for the first time, I realized it was true. I'm better. Thanks to you. There was a brief pause on her end, and then she laughed softly, that same gentle laugh that had always made the hospital room feel a little brighter. I didn't do much. You did all the hard work. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to go for it. I was wondering if you'd like to get a cup of coffee sometime. You know, outside of the hospital. There was another pause, and my heart pounded in the silence. Was this a mistake? Was she going to turn me down? But then she spoke, and there was a smile in her voice. I'd like that. When are you free? The coffee shop. We met at a small, cozy coffee shop tucked away in the city. The kind of place where the chairs didn't match, and the barista knew everyone's name. I arrived a few minutes early, nervous energy bubbling in my chest. I hadn't been on a date in years, and this felt like unfamiliar territory. When Emma walked through the door, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. She was dressed simply, a warm cardigan draped over her shoulders, her hair falling in loose waves. There was no pretense about her, no effort to impress. She was just Emma, calm, confident, and so different from Olivia that it was almost a shock to my system. She smiled when she saw me, and it wasn't the forced, tight-lipped smile I had grown accustomed to with Olivia. It was genuine, warm, and it reached her eyes. "Hey," she said as she approached the table. "Hope I didn't keep you waiting long." "Not at all," I replied, standing up awkwardly before we both sat down. My nerves felt less important now that she was here. The conversation flowed easily. We talked about everything and nothing: the hospital, her latest patients, my plans to rebuild my life. There was no pressure, no expectations. It was just two people sharing a moment, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. At one point, she leaned in, her elbow resting on the table, her eyes searching mine. You know, when you were in the hospital, you had this look in your eyes, like you were drowning. But now, she paused, her lips curving into a soft smile. You seem lighter, like you've finally come up for air. Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. For so long, I had been suffocating. First under Olivia's betrayal, then under the weight of my own bitterness. But sitting here with Emma, it was like I could finally breathe again. I didn't think I'd make it through, I admitted quietly. But you've helped me more than you know. She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine lightly. You didn't need me. You were stronger than you realized. I just reminded you of that. Her touch was soft, but it sent a jolt through me. I hadn't felt this kind of connection in so long, and it was terrifying how natural it felt. But it wasn't the burning, obsessive need I had once felt for Olivia. It was something gentler, something that felt like it could actually last. A walk to remember. After the coffee, neither of us seemed ready to end the evening. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the streets. Without thinking much about it, we ended up walking along the river, the sound of the water, and the distant hum of the city creating a peaceful backdrop. As we walked, Emma told me more about herself, how she'd always wanted to be a doctor, how she had seen so many people in their worst moments, but never let it harden her. I found myself sharing parts of my life that I hadn't talked about in years. Not just the divorce, but the parts of myself I had lost along the way, the dreams I had let go of. The person I used to be before I got so caught up in trying to be the perfect husband. She listened, really listened, without judgment, without offering empty platitudes. She just was, and that was more than enough. At one point, we stopped at a small overlook, the city lights reflecting off the water below. I turned to look at her, and in that moment, I realized something that scared me more than anything. I wanted more, not just from the night, but from her, from life. I know this sounds crazy, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. But I feel like I'm waking up again, like everything that happened before was a bad dream, and now I'm finally alive. She looked at me, her eyes soft and full of understanding. Maybe that's exactly what's happening. Maybe this is your second chance. And as the night settled around us, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not the blind, desperate hope of wanting to fix something broken, but the real, solid hope of something new, something real. And for the first time, I was ready to embrace it. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long golden beams across the kitchen floor. It was a crisp, clear day, and for the first time in a long time, I woke up without that familiar weight in my chest. The shadows of the past were still there, but they didn't cling to me anymore. They didn't suffocate me like they once had. I stood by the kitchen window, sipping a cup of coffee and looking out over the city. The skyline, the distant hum of traffic, the life bustling below. It all felt like a new world. A world where I wasn't defined by betrayal, by anger, by the ruins of a marriage that had nearly destroyed me. This was my world now, and for the first time in years, I was the one in control of it. I hadn't seen or heard from Olivia since she walked out of the house that day. The divorce was final. The settlement papers were signed, the debts split, and my old life was officially behind me. In truth, I didn't care what she was doing now. She had become nothing more than a distant memory, a ghost that no longer haunted me. What mattered now was the life in front of me. And more than anything, it was Emma who filled that life with light, moving forward. Emma and I hadn't rushed into anything. After our coffee date, we continued to meet up casually. Walks in the park, dinners in little tucked-away restaurants, long talks that stretched late into the night. It was like we were slowly peeling away the layers of our lives, revealing who we really were beneath the surface. With her, everything was easy. There were no games, no pretense. She never tried to fill the silence with meaningless chatter or force me to talk about things I wasn't ready to confront. She simply was solid, patient, and understanding. And that, more than anything, allowed me to heal. But it wasn't just the simplicity of being with her that made this different. It was the way she challenged me, pushed me to rediscover the parts of myself that I'd buried for so long. She saw me not as the broken man who had stumbled into her hospital, but as someone with potential, someone capable of more than just surviving. "I'm proud of you, she said one night as we sat on the balcony of her apartment, watching the city lights flicker below, not just for getting through the divorce, but for letting go of the past. I looked at her, the moonlight casting a soft glow on her face. "I don't know if I've completely let it go," I admitted, "but I'm trying." "And that's all that matters," she said, her hand finding mine. "We're all works in progress, Liam. No one expects you to have everything figured out, but you're doing the hard work, and that's something to be proud of." She always had a way of cutting through the noise, of making me see things in a way I hadn't considered. And with her, I felt like I was finally starting to figure out who I was, not just the man I'd become through my struggles, but the man I wanted to be. The new venture. It wasn't long before I realized that Emma wasn't just helping me recover emotionally. She was also helping me find my passion again. For years, I had been caught up in the grind of running my business, of keeping up appearances and maintaining a lifestyle that in the end had become more of a trap than anything else. But now, I wanted something different. I started thinking about new ventures, new opportunities that excited me, challenged me in ways I hadn't felt in years. One idea kept resurfacing, a project I had pushed aside during my marriage, a small boutique investment firm focused on ethical business practices. It wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about doing something meaningful, something that could make a difference. One evening, as Emma and I sat together, I brought up the idea, feeling a little uncertain about it. "I've been thinking about starting something new," I said, watching her reaction closely. "A boutique firm. Small scale, but focused on investments that actually help people. Sustainable projects, ethical businesses. It's something I've always wanted to do, but I never had the time, or maybe the guts." Emma smiled, her eyes lighting up. "That sounds amazing, Liam. It's something you're passionate about, and you have the experience. What's stopping you?" I shrugged, feeling a twinge of old doubt creeping in. "I guess I'm worried. Starting over is hard. What if it doesn't work out?" Emma leaned in, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Starting over is scary, but you've already done it once. And look where you are now. You've rebuilt yourself from the ground up. This is just another chapter, another chance to make something incredible. And even if it's hard, even if you stumble, I'll be right here with you." Her words hit me deep, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of excitement, real excitement, about the future. This wasn't about proving something to anyone else. It wasn't about rebuilding what was lost. It was about creating something new, something that was truly mine. A trip to the past. A few weeks later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I went back to the hospital where everything had started, the place where I had woken up after the accident, where I had overheard Olivia's betrayal, where I had first met Emma. It wasn't an easy decision. Going back to that place felt like opening an old wound, but I needed to do it. I needed to see the place where my life had fallen apart, not to dwell on it, but to close the chapter for good. Emma met me there, and together we walked through the halls. Everything looked the same. The sterile walls, the buzzing of the machines, the faint smell of antiseptic. But I wasn't the same man who had been wheeled into those halls months ago, broken and lost. I was different now, stronger, wiser. We stood outside the intensive care unit, the place where I had first heard Olivia plotting my death, and I took a deep breath. I never thought I'd be back here, I said quietly. Emma slipped her hand into mine, giving it a gentle squeeze. You don't have to stay long, just long enough to say goodbye. And that's what I did. I stood there, staring at the place where my old life had ended, and I let go. I let go of the anger, the pain, the betrayal. I let go of Olivia. I let go of the man I used to be. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It was over. I was free. The new beginning. Life with Emma felt like stepping into a new world, one filled with possibilities I had never considered. We didn't rush things, but there was an unspoken understanding between us that what we had was real. It wasn't the fiery, obsessive love I'd once thought was the ideal. It was something deeper, something that grew stronger with time. One evening, as we sat on my newly renovated balcony, the city lights twinkling below us, I turned to her and asked a question I had been thinking about for weeks. What do you think about moving in together? Emma's eyes widened slightly, surprised but not alarmed. A slow smile spread across her lips. I think I'd like that.